Hi everyone, so in this video I'll be talking about how you can apply for spousal open work permit in Canada. What exactly is a spousal open work permit? Now, this is the kind of work permit that you have as a spouse of an international student in Canada. I mean, if you are also a spouse of a foreign worker in Canada, you will also be eligible for the spousal open work permit. But specifically in this video, I'll be talking about if you are a spouse of an international student that is planning to come to Canada or already in Canada, you may be eligible for a spousal open work permit, provided that the program that your spouse is doing in Canada is it going to be a full-time program or is a full-time program, and the institution is eligible for or they offer postgraduate work permit eligible programs. And if that's your situation, you are eligible for postgraduates. If that is your circumstances, then you are eligible for the spousal open work permit. Now, in this video, I'll talk about 4 different ways that you can use to apply for a spousal open work permit. So whether you're in Canada or outside of Canada, it may apply to you differently. What I'm going to do now is to list out the 4 options, and then in the later part of the video, I'm going to take each one and then expand on it so that you can get all of the processes involved and the document involved. Now, the first option is when you're applying for your study permit outside of Canada, which means if you apply for study permit, at that point of applying for study permit outside of Canada, you can include your spouse and your children, irrespective of the program that you are coming to Canada to do, whether an undergraduate, whether a certificate program, a 2-year diploma, master's or PhD. You can't bring your spouse and your children if you have maybe all of the funds available that is required and you meet the eligibility. The second option is when you are inside Canada. Okay, so when you're inside Canada, if your spouse is inside Canada and your spouse is a registered full-time international student, their spouse outside of Canada can apply for a spousal open work permit, and then you can also include your children in the application. So this is different from the first one where you're applying from outside of Canada. Okay, so for this second application, this second one I just talked about now, it is you are a student in Canada and you're not extending your work permit or doing anything. You just want to apply for your spouse. Okay, that's the second option. The third option is still in Canada and now you are applying to extend your study permit. There are sometimes in Canada, maybe due to your passport expiring and all that, you may not have the full validity of the period of study on your passport. You will be eligible to extend your study permit. So when you're extending your study permit, they're going to ask you, do you want to add any family member? Then you're going to click yes. And then while extending your study permit, you will now be able to include your spouse and your children. Your spouse cannot, while you get a study permit extension, your spouse cannot get open work permit, and also your children for either study permit and the work permit, depends on their age. I'll talk about all these in the later part of the video. The fourth option is this depends on individual. Among these 4 options, you can choose the one you want to do, depends on the one that works best for you. So I'm not really recommending the one that you should do. The fourth one is when you are in Canada and your spouse is outside of Canada, your spouse can apply for a visitor visa to Canada, and say you want to go visit your spouse in Canada. Okay, when you apply, this is very legal to do, right? When you are in Canada, you can change your visitor's visa to the spouse open work permit. Okay, the good thing about this spousal work permit is that you don't need a job offer to apply for it. Okay, and you can work for any employer in Canada. So let's dive in and look at these 4 options in details, and I'll expand them one after the other so that you can get more insight into what each method entails. The first option is if you're applying outside of Canada. So it's very possible to come with your family, whether you're applying for a diploma in colleges or masters or PhD universities. You can bring your family. Okay, when you're filling your study permit application, okay, for this particular one, if you're outside of Canada, there's going to be a place, a point where they will ask you, do you want to add another family member to this application? At that point, you're going to answer yes, and then you fill your spouse. After filling information for your spouse, they're going to ask you, do you want to add another family member? You keep saying yes and yes until you get to the last family member, which obviously this is for spouse and children only, right? Like your brothers and sisters are not going to be your dependents, so you can't apply for them, to come to you as dependents. Now, the good thing about this type of application is that it is all going to be in the same application, right? You don't have to create separate accounts for everybody. It's going to be one account. It's going to be one JC key that you're going to be using. Whoever the applicant, whatever the email address that you're using, when they send any message, you're going to receive all of the information in that email. So you don't need separate email, just one email address for correspondence. And when you submit the application, everyone is going to have their own application number and their UCI number. Now let's talk about some of the documents that are needed if you want to do this option of kind of applying for everybody together during the process of your study permit application. For the applicant that is applying for the study permit, you're going to need, I'm not really talking about study permit in this video, so I'm not going to be going into details to talk about all of these. But just to give you a tip, you're going to be needing the normal documents you require for study permit application. For example, your letter of acceptance, your international passport, your passport photograph. You're going to need to fill family information. You're going to need to write a very good letter of explanation. In this letter of explanation, you're going to add that you're including your spouse and your children in the application. Okay, you're going to write one letter of explanation for everybody, and then you're going to need proof of funds. I've already talked about in other videos how much you need to show for proof of funds, so there's going to be a link in the description. Check out that video to know how much you need to show for proof of funds. But overall, you need to show more funds if you're applying along with your family. Proof of relationship like marriage certificates and then birth certificate for your children, police report, and then upfront medicals is optional. You can wait for them to request, or everyone can do medicals and then just upload it. And then you're going to need what's called the use of family representative. Basically, it means you are the one as the applicant representing every other person in the application. So you have to fill that, and then filling your husband have to sign, and then maybe your children, you don't need to sign for your children. Anybody less than 18 don't need to sign. And then your education credentials, of course. And then if you have family picture, then you can also add that as well. And this is for the applicant. For the person that is going to be coming as a dependent, which is a spouse that is applying for the open work permit, then one of the things you're going to need to include is your purpose of visit. This is basically just like a letter, right? To just maybe one or two paragraphs to state that you're going with your spouse, to support them. You are the one that you can kind of think about more of the reasons to put. Everybody's case is different, but generally just that you're following your spouse, maybe for emotional support, and to also assist with the children, and if you have any children. Spouse also need account statement if possible. If the applicant, if they have an application account statement that can cover everybody, that's fine. And then you can include your employment or business related documents, like maybe letter of reference, letter of employment, and all that. And then I think there's also you are going to have your, I know I mentioned that only the applicant will write letter of explanation, but in your own application, there's going to be what is called client information. So you can also write a very short letter of explanation to also explain why you are following your spouse. Okay, then for the applicant is going to write why you are following following him or her to Canada. So it's more like it's going to be closely related to the same thing, but if you have the options to do more explanation, why not get it done? For the children, if you are including them, for those that have kids, you can apply for visitor visa for them if they are less than, let's say, 3 to 4 years old. And then if they are more than 4 or 5 years, you can apply for a study permit for them. The good thing is that even though you're applying for study permit for your children, they don't need letter of acceptance. acceptance. All you just need to do is to write a letter and mention that, oh, according to there is a link. You need to just do a search on the CIC website in terms of if the parent they come to Canada on a valid study or work permit. The children don't need they don't need an acceptance letter from a high school in Canada, right? So you can just write a letter and send that my children, they are exempted. And then you're going to need their birth certificate and then their international passport. Okay, that is the first option. Okay, the second option now is your spouse is already in Canada and you are outside of Canada. Okay, and this scenario is when your spouse in Canada is not applying for anything. Okay, they just want to make sure that their spouse outside of Canada wants to come to Canada, and then the one with the study permit is not applying for anything. In this case, you the one in Canada, if you want to do the application on behalf of your spouse, that's fine, right? You just need to fill in their information, and every other thing. Both of you can do it together. It doesn't matter where you submit it. The embassy, what they know is that you are submitting it outside of Canada, even though you fill it inside of Canada as the applicant. You and your spouse can kind of work together and kind of see how to go about the application, but you need a new JCK. The reason is because the spouse in Canada is not doing any application at that time, so you can't use the one outside of Canada cannot use their JCK. So they have to create their own JCK. You cannot use your spouse in Canada's JCK. Or maybe you're thinking of, if I use their JCK or their portal, then they will know that, oh, it will connect faster. No, you got to create your own application, your own JCK, and then use that for the application. Like I said, you outside of Canada can do the application. Technically you are the one doing it. Okay, the one in Canada can also do it, and then they just fill in your information. For example, if they're saying what is your spouse date, or if let's say I'm in Canada and I'm applying for my wife in my home country, then if I'm going to fill in what's name, then I'm going to fill my wife's name, right? Just the same you are going to do, right? So whoever is going to be better in the application or has kind of a better experience can be the one that will do the application. And what are some of the documents that you need to do this type of application? Okay, the spouse in Canada, or the one in Canada, he or she will provide international passport, their valid study permit, the enrollment letter from the university or the college where they are attending school. If they can also get a student ID, that would be fantastic. If they have any part-time job that they are doing in Canada, they can also provide that. And then if they are the one to provide a bank statement and everything from Canada, they can provide that. Their spouse that's outside of Canada can also provide their bank statement. So whoever has a better opportunity can provide their bank statement. And then the one in Canada is going to write a letter of invitation. Okay, and then if possible, if you have a proof of address, maybe like your house lease, that'll be really good, so that you can explain that when your spouse and children come to Canada, they are going to be staying with you. So you need to show a proof of address for that. Okay, the letter of explanation in this case will be written strictly by the applicant outside of Canada. You have to explain that you are coming to meet your spouse, okay, in Canada, and then you explain why you want to go, how long you've been married, and some other intricate things. Now, if you're really finding it difficult to do this application, I know it's kind of tricky, but reach out to me. I do have specifically a mentorship program. I can guide you and provide you one-on-one mentorship on how you can go about this spousal open work permit application. There's going to be a link in the description and also in the pinned comment. Reach out to me through my website, and then we can talk about this. And then for the children, in this case, your children are going to be needing either visitor's visa or study permit, as I've talked about before. All other documents that I talked about in the other group of application is all the same, so there is no difference. Now, the third option is if you are inside of Canada and you are applying to extend your study permit. This is a perfect opportunity to include your spouse and your children in the application. In this case, your spouse outside of Canada and your children, they don't need to create a different GCK. Okay, they can just use the same GCK, your own GCK. Then when I submit your application for a study permit extension, they're going to ask you the question, are you including a family member in this application? Once you answer yes, then they're going to create a separate portal, for you to be able to include all of the relevant documents as regards your spouse and your children in this application. The good thing about this type of application is that when you apply, now you are applying from inside Canada. Although your spouse outside of Canada is still applying for, is going to fill a form called application for work permit outside of Canada. So even though you submit it from inside of Canada, they're going to fill all of those forms, because technically they are applying for work permit outside of Canada. It is only when they are inside of Canada, maybe on a visitor visa that I'll be talking about next, that they can apply for work permit from inside of Canada. So all other documents that I've mentioned remain the same. Your study permit, enrollment letter, all the documents, your spouse recommendation letter, marriage certificate, your children's birth certificate, letter of explanation, letter of invitation, they're pretty much going to be. Now this is almost the same as if you're applying from outside of the first time, if everybody's applying together. Just like this time around, you already have your UCI number, you already have a working GCK. That is how this particular option works. Now the fourth option is, when you are already in Canada, you can apply for visit visa for your spouse. Okay, so just think about the same documents needed for visit visa. Okay, I think the most important part of this is going to be a letter of invitation that the spouse inside of Canada is going to be writing for the spouse that is outside, for the one that is outside of Canada, saying that I'm inviting them to come visit me. So in this case, you're going to show your enrollment letter, study permit, just to show that you are a full-time registered student and that your husband is and your children are coming to visit you. You can do that definitely. In terms of timeline for all of these applications, it varies. Okay, I've seen cases where spouse open work permit, I've seen like 7 months, I've seen 8 months, I've even seen 1 year, even more than. But the quickest I've seen is less than 2 months. Okay, so I would say, when you're applying, give yourself a couple of months to get response, because you can't tell how long it's going to be. Another thing, what I would advise you is, immediately you arrive in Canada, you don't even need to wait for 6 months before you can start applying for your spouse open work permit. Immediately you are in Canada, 1 month you can start putting together the application. This is the reason why you should watch this video before going to Canada, if you haven't. And for those in Canada, it's good you're watching this video pretty early, so that you know that once you arrive, there is no time frame that, oh, you must be in Canada for 6 months before you apply. Right away you are registered as a student, you can apply. And this is usually better, because if you're doing a 1-year program, let's say by the 8th month you are applying for spouse work permit, and let's say you graduate and they haven't responded to them, it's going to be a problem, because your spouse open work permit and your children's study permit or visit visa is going to be dependent on your own study permit, right? So if you're graduating very soon, this may not be the best option. Okay, if you are graduating in the next 2-3 months, then they apply for spousal work permit not be the best option. What you can do is, when you graduate and you now get a skilled job under the post-graduation work permit, then you can invite your spouse to come around at that time to get the spousal work permit. And if you still don't want to do that, you still want to wait more, it's up to you. Then when you get to applying for your permanent residency, at that time you can include your spouse. But It's up to you. You decide with among all of these 4 options that I've mentioned, you decide that the one that suits you best and do the application. So that's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed this video, do it to hit that like button so that it's going to help YouTube recommend this video to other people. And if you haven't subscribed, this will be the perfect time to smash that like button so that whenever new videos are released, you'll be the first person to get it. Again, thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next video.